Just when you thought that newspaper stories on electric vehicles couldn't get any worse or biased, this is money pale the rest of them into insignificance. And it's not the story as such, it's, well, stay with us till the end, because I think EV people are liars. You can't trust anything they say. Even the green electric from my video yesterday, they can buy certificates to say that the energy's green, even when it's not. EVs are dirtier to start off with when they're produced. They give you this timeline where they catch up with ICE vehicles. But that's, again, in an alternative reality where the fuel is really green. So I saw this story the other day. This is money. To be honest, I was fuming and I couldn't bring myself to make a video about it. But several people on Twitter and YouTube have asked my opinion. If somebody asks me a question, I answer it honestly. No holding back. No filters in here. I say what I think. Paper mile tax for electric cars from 2028 confirmed in the budget. EV owners tell us how it will hit them. How do you feel about paper mile tax? Email John Brady at dailymail.co.uk by Frida Lewis Stemple, motoring reporter, and Rob Hull, an EMU motoring editor. 27th of November 2025. Electric vehicles will be subject to a mileage-based electric vehicle excise duty, small e, VED. Charged from April 2028 in a move that's been slammed by the motoring industry as confusing. It's not confusing to me. Who's confused by it? On ICE vehicles would pay 53 pence plus VAT a litre fuel tax. Electric vehicles don't pay anything. And they get cheap fuel if they charge at home overnight, putting the family at risk and risking setting fire to their house and, stuff like that, and being asleep when it happens. So who's it confusing? What is confusing about 3 pence per mile? Should I tell you what I think is confusing about 3 pence per mile? I have a Citroen Ami. If I do 10,000 miles in my Citroen Ami, which cost 9 grand, will only do 46 miles range, 28 miles an hour, I have to pay £300. Now, the owner of a £450,000 Rolls-Royce Spectre, if he does 10,000 miles, oh, that's confusing. He only has to pay £300. Whereas if somebody in a Ford Fiesta, petrol, does 10,000 miles, because his car does more miles to the gallon, he pays less than somebody in a petrol Bentley, because their car does less. So he pays more fuel duty. Now that's fair. Do you know what's not fair? All the electric vehicles paying 3 pence per mile. So me and my Citroen Ami, you in your G-Wagon, electric, same money. How can that be fair? Which brain dead numbskull in the government, so that kind of describes them all, doesn't it? Perhaps it's a think tank, because we know what happens when somebody comes out with a think tank. Seemingly things tank, especially EVs. In order to raise a predicted 1.9 billion for the government's coffers by 2030, well, they can't take heating allowances off pensioners, can they? Oh yeah, they did that. Funny, isn't it? You know, when we had a really cold winter a few years ago, lots of old people died because they couldn't afford to put the heating on. But yet, they can afford to give somebody £3,750 to buy a new EV. 12.5 pensioners lost their heating allowance last year. so you can buy a new EV this year. Does that make you feel good? Yeah? Does it give you a little glow? You selfish. Honestly. You know what? They can shove my heating allowance up.
The British government on Monday reversed its unpopular plan to end winter home heating subsidies for millions of retirees. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had signalled a U-turn last month after a loud outcry from the public and some members of his Labour Party who thought the relatively modest £1.5 billion savings were too politically costly. Put this into perspective, they saved £1.5 billion freezing pensioners to death last year and have given £2 billion to idiots to buy new EVs, which will in turn cause billions of pounds of depreciation on the used car market. I don't know who is the thickest, the evangelists or the government.
Yeah? Does it give you a little glow? You selfish. Honestly. You know what? They can shove my heating allowance up. And the funny thing is that all this, you know, people going on about it, 2028, the chances of Labour being in government in 2028 are zero. Absolutely zero. Reform Party will get in and they'll scrap all this shit. So why don't we wait and let's see what happens. The Chancellor used her budget to confirm the Treasury's controversial road pricing plans, which seek to claw back lost fuel duty revenue as the nation moves to zero emissions. Paper mile schemes have been batted around for years as MPs have struggled to find ways to fill the 40 billion fiscal black hole created by the switch to EVs and the loss of motoring taxes, including fuel duty. 40 billion. She's going to get 1.9 billion back. 40 billion. Well, that black hole, you know the 650 million electric car grant, and then the 1.3 billion top-up electric car grant. Things don't add up, do they?
This is from Andrew Neil's Twitter account yesterday. This will be a tough weekend for the Chancellor. She knew almost 6 weeks before the budget from the OBR there was no black hole, yet she and the Treasury still stoked up the idea that there was, and it would take big tax rises to fill it. By October 31st, she knew from the OBR there was actually 4 billion headroom rather than a black hole. Yet still on November the 5th, she commandeered breakfast media to roll the pitch for big tax rises. Even by mid-November, she was telling the BBC if Labour stuck to its manifesto commitments, i.e. no income tax rises, she'd need deep cuts to capital investment. None of what she said in the run-up to the budget was true. The Treasury Select Committee needs to ask her why she so misled the Parliament, the markets and the British people. She raised taxes to give herself some more headroom and to pay for yet another increase in largely welfare spending. The tax burden is going to all-time record level for a simple reason. The Labour manifesto said public spending would be around 10 billion higher than Tory plans by 2028/29. In reality, on the latest projections, it will be 179 billion higher. Nothing to do with filling in black holes. That's the Labour government for you, I'm afraid. Straight from Andrew Neil, possibly the only journalist I'd trust.
Ms Reeves, re-EVs again, told Parliament today all cars contribute to wear and tear on our roads, so it's only right that our motoring taxes cover EVs via a modest per mile levy. Yes, Rachel, I think that's the first thing you've said that I agree with. With extra support to keep EV ownership attractive. But they save a lot of money. Is that not attractive? The OBR predicts that the introduction of small e, VED, will reduce demand for electric cars as it increases their lifetime cost, with an estimated 440,000 fewer EV sales across the next 5 years, because they won't look on the black side, will they? It's not in their interest. However, the Treasury said the OBR's calculation is incorrect and it will be closer to 120,000 EV shortfall between now and the end of the decade. 120,000 EV shortfall. What about the grant, the £3,750 grant? That will pay somebody who does 10,000 miles the same as a pensioner's heating allowance, funnily enough. So it will pay, the grant on the EV will pay a pensioner's heating allowance 12.5 times, or your EVED 12.5 times. And if you only get one with 1,500 quid, it'll pay it 5 times, won't it? So you're no worse off, are you? It too is expected to be offset by a forecast 130,000 increase in electric vehicle sales due to other EV budget incentives, including an expansion of the electric car grant and increasing the VED, not the EVED, the VED expensive car supplement threshold to 50,000. Pay per mile will see EV owners having to pay a modest 3p charge per mile they drive. This is on top of the £195 a year VED rate electric drivers now have to pay since April this year. Plug-in hybrid vehicles, PHEVs, which have small batteries and are capable of covering up to 90 miles on electric-only models, will also be subject to a 1.5 per mile charge. Well, really speaking, I don't really want to be the one to point this out, but the 1.5p per mile charge for the electric, that's a bit of a bummer. That's going to stop PHEV vehicle sales, not electric. It'll stop PHEVs because they don't use electric. PHEVs, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, they don't use electric. It's got a petrol or diesel engine in. So they just use petrol or diesel. So now they're going to have to pay fuel tax and 1.5 pence per mile. Funny, isn't it? Because the range on a PHEV, when you work it out, PHEV people are paying fuel duty on the fuel, and now they're paying 1.5 pence per mile on the electricity they're not using. How can you charge them that? Who's worked that out? Why should they pay that money? Fair enough. If there was some way of telling how far they've driven on petrol or diesel, and then how far they've driven on electric, then sure, you've saved your fuel tax, so pay your 1.5p per mile. Both rates will rise annually in line with CPI. This is the funny bit. Daily Mail and This Is Money has spoken to 5 EV drivers to see how it will impact their finances. So let's just read what the 5 EV drivers have to say about this 3p per mile that's not coming in until 2028. EV owner Jill Nowell has been driving EVs since 2012 and would still pick an EV today. What I want you to pay particular attention to is, you know, when somebody's been robbed or I don't know, or somebody's been robbed or something's happened in the town that they're displeased about, and a newspaper interviews them, the photographer must say to them, "Oh, put your best sad face on, will you? Look as sad as you can." And then they go. They're really happy at being in the paper and getting the fizzog in the Daily Mail. but try and look sad. Oh, I don't know how I'm going to get over this. Years ago, I was interviewed by the Lancs Evening Post, I think it was. Somebody had tried to run a protection racket on us. We told him to fuck off. We wouldn't pay. So he paint stripped our cars. One of the reporters said to me, and how did that make you feel? It made me feel like if I caught him, I'd knock the shit out of him. Oh, well, that's not what I meant. Were you sad? No. Now these 5 drivers, I don't know how they got hold of them. I can only speculate. Jill Nowell, she looks a bit sad, would still pick an EV because charging at home saves her so much money. Cheshire business founder. Gosh, I wonder what business she's in. I wonder why they don't say what business she's in. But anyway, Jill Nowell, 52. She'll be mad about that. Cheshire business founder Jill Nowell, 52, tell us, I've driven EVs through work since 2012 and I've had an electric car since 2019. Even with pay per mile, I'd still choose electric. If I end up paying around £250 a year through pay per mile, I'm still saving about £750 in running costs by charging at home. It cost me less than £5 to fully charge at home overnight.
I've run into Jill before on Twitter. This is a LinkedIn page. Strategic EV Communications, EVA England, speaker and host, followed by all the usual suspects. Jill Nowell, April 12th, 2024. Free holidays, an unintended consequence of having an electric car. How so? Question mark. Confused emoji. It's very simple. I've saved thousands of pounds since switching to an #EV, and this effectively pays for our summer getaways, #electric vehicles. My reply, I'm so sorry, you have a lovely smile. I got criticised for being condescending with that, but I genuinely meant it. But that is just not true, and you are deliberately misleading people to push your EV agenda. Your Kia Niro EV cost new £37,345. Remember, this was in 2024 April. Today it has a trade value of £16,400. It's lost an eye-watering £20,945, or 56%. Whereas a Kia Niro 1.6 GDI, same year, same spec, same miles, but petrol hybrid, cost new £28,785. Today, its trade value is £18,800, so your EV cost £8,560 more, and it is now worth £2,400 less. That's £10,960 difference. Even if your electric is free, you could buy 1,461 gallons of petrol, and I'm guessing your car has done about 27,000 miles, so at 60 miles per gallon, it would cost £3,069 to buy 450 gallons. And the owner of the petrol car would still have £7,891 to take his family on holiday without being any worse off than you being sat at home looking out your window at your heavily depreciating EV. Sorry, no free lunches or holidays for people with EVs. By the way, it doesn't stop there. As EVs are being artificially propped up by the valuation services, we buy any car, value it at £13,790, so that would be another £2,610 less, or another holiday that you didn't get for free. Hope that helps. Remember the lovely lady with the beautiful smile who wrote the article about getting a free holiday due to the unintended consequences of running an EV? Well, no f***ing wonder she was smiling. I couldn't keep my face straight if I was telling a whopper like that. Go and ask this dealer who has had his 1,300 mile Kia Niro in stock for 756 days. What the unintended consequences of having a pile of EV shit on his forecourt for over 2 years are. Because that average cost of stocking and advertising used to be £7 a day. That amounts to £5,292, and it has been reduced by £4,940 too, so he could have gone to Sandy Lane with that money. Then when you take into account that he could have had that money in an ICE vehicle, turned it over and made profit every 29 days, say £1,000 each time, then he's lost out on another £25,000. That was the vehicle. You can see when it was first advertised, and then you can see all the times it's been reduced to. Unintended consequences.
But the real issue is fairness. According to EVA England, half of drivers without driveways already find their EVs more expensive to run because public charging costs more. Yes, like myself, over 95% of us would never go back to the ICE, internal combustion engine, age. Well, that's kind of makes my point on this story, because when they do these surveys, who do you think they ask whether they're happy with their EVs? Do they ask all the owners every day that are selling their EVs after a few days, a few weeks, a few months on private to trade websites that you can see every day? You can see how long they've had them, how many owners they've had. Do you think they ask them whether they're happy? Or do you think they ask people, like, for argument's sake, jury selection? They go through, they have a number of jurors that they can pick from, and they go through and they ask them questions. And they can choose to not have a juror because they don't think it will be very good for their case. Imagine if they did that when, say, for instance, they're writing stories about the new 3p per mile tax on EVs, or if they're asking who's happy with their EV. Would they ask somebody who's selling it after 2 weeks, a month, 3 months? Let's continue with the story. So Jill says 95% of people are happy with their EVs and won't go back to the ice age. It's a good little sound bit, that, isn't it? Won't go back to the ice age. Tesla owner Jacob Eden wouldn't have bought an EV if he knew pay per mile was coming. He would still go ahead with it in place because he prefers his Tesla to a combustion car. But he's in a good position where his employer picks up the pay per mile tax costs. Jacob, 32, who works in telecommunications and lives in Southend-on-Sea, answers, probably not. I understand that EV drivers must also pay their way, and rightly so, but this is too soon. It's mixed messaging and confusing for the consumer. What's confusing? I don't get it. If you were buying an EV with pay per mile in place, would you still go ahead? I think we still would. I think we still would, because I far prefer my EV to combustion, but it would certainly make me think twice. And that means there are a lot of people out there who would hesitate and then potentially not switch. So you see, this person, that he's turned a negative into a positive, because what he's telling you, very cleverly, what he's telling you is he wouldn't have gone ahead if he'd known the 3p per mile was coming. The only reason he wouldn't have gone ahead was because he didn't know how good electric vehicles were. He was ill-informed. He was ignorant. He didn't know. So he wouldn't have gone ahead, but now he's actually driven it. Forget the 3p a mile. I'll still go ahead because I prefer the drive. If you prefer the drive of an electric vehicle to an ICE car of the same value, then honestly, you don't know what fun is. You really don't. You don't know what man and machine being in sync, in perfect harmony, being a good driver, clipping the apex, as they all say. You don't know what fun it is. EVs aren't fun. Honestly, they're not. If you think an EV is fun, you do not know how to enjoy yourself. And that's pretty much borne out by all the people that you see who've got EVs. How much extra will it cost you? I'd be able to expense the miles for business, so that would be felt by the employer. However, it would certainly add more to our home energy bill at a time when bills are already a hefty chunk of our outgoings. The 3p per mile would add to your home energy bills. Do you think pay per mile is fair? It's fair if it's applied to all vehicles, not just EVs. What would be fair is unfreeze the fuel duty and bring in money that way, and then potentially look at pay per mile for all vehicle types. That doesn't sound fair to me. I don't know about anybody else, but no, I'm afraid not. That's not fair. How will it change your EV ownership? My EV is through my business, so there's no real change for me. So a charge that goes through your business, would that not mean you make less profit? Is that not a business expense? Will you still save by owning an EV, or will savings be swallowed up by pay per mile? Not entirely, and the running costs are still far lower. We really love our EV and hope more people get the right signals to help them make the switch. Why? Why do you hope that? Why do you say that? You're being asked about your situation. You can run your EV through your business, but other people can't. So why have you volunteered that information? Marvin Samuels, 2EV household, who uses his EV for his commute. If you were buying an EV with pay per mile in place, would you still go ahead? Marvin Samuels, a 50-year-old test and release manager from Chester, answers, if I was planning to buy an EV as the potential pay per mile plans were announced, I would still buy an EV. Do you think it's fair? If the revenue collected goes directly to maintaining UK roads, then I think it is mostly fair. Although those living in rural areas, a long distance from their place of work, or that need to travel for their job, it could become unsustainable for those individuals. Why? Why could it? What about the people living in rural areas with ICE cars who pay fuel tax? What about farmers with diesel tractors and combine harvesters and all their machinery who pay fuel tax? I don't get the difference. Will you still save by owning an EV? Or will savings be swallowed up by pay per mile? Having calculated the potential additional costs based on my regular commute and additional trips for work, and compared them to the cost of running an ICE vehicle, financially it would still be beneficial to me and my family to own an EV. Personally, the reduced running costs are a benefit of, rather than a reason to switch to an EV. We currently have 2 EVs and a petrol car. The petrol car spends most of its time in a garage and is used only occasionally. Paying for petrol for it feels excessive these days, and running 2 EVs has proved more cost effective for us. Why do you keep your petrol car? You've got 2 EVs, why do you keep your petrol car? Very, very good though. Having calculated the potential additional costs based on my regular commute and additional trips for work, and compared them to the cost of running an ICE vehicle, financially it would still be beneficial to me and my family to own an EV. Personally, the reduced running costs are a benefit of, rather than a reason to switch to an EV. So Marvin would have an EV no matter what the cost. It's just beneficial that he can save money. Is anybody else getting like a funny sort of vibe off this news story? Yeah? Gary Comover says that the timing for EV paper mail is pretty poor and that an EV disincentive seems counterintuitive. Gary Comerford, EV driver who will stick with his electric car but thinks the government should wait. Is paper mail a good idea? Gary Comover, a 58-year-old business consultant from Reading, says, the timing on this is pretty poor. EVs make up around 5% of the car park in the UK, and the government is committed through the ZEV mandate to increase that by 2030. Gary's very well informed, isn't he? He knows how many EVs are there. Thinks it's a bad time, the government. Thinks it's a disincentive and it's counterintuitive. Adding a financial disincentive soon after adding a financial incentive in the form of the new car grant and a disincentive in the form of adding VED, no, small e, big V, big E, big D, to electric cars seems counterintuitive. Wait until EVs form a larger proportion of the overall car park. Then implement this. It will be far better received. No, it won't. No, it won't. No, all that will happen is that more people will have been deceived, because it will happen and it'll get worse. But then the move to EVs will have gathered enough momentum to see them through. What they're going to do? All change back to petrol? Do you think? No. What they have to do, they have to get over the hill. Going up the hill at the moment, the hill's here and they're here. What they've got to do, they've got to get up here, and once they're here to the point of no return, then the government can do whatever they want. And there isn't one thing you can do about it, because everybody will have stopped making ICE vehicles. Hopefully they won't smash the moulds, they won't do a Planet of the Apes and destroy all the books on how to make things and, you know, the machines, and they'll keep them so they can just go back, because it'll come back. How will it change your EV ownership? I will perhaps consider the financial implications of taking a journey by car in favour of not taking this journey. If it wasn't a necessary trip, £3p per mile is not a great deal. But £300 a year can add up if you don't watch those miles. Will you still save by owning an EV, or will savings be swallowed up? In my case, this will still leave me financially better off than owning and running an electric vehicle. Yes, that's the first true word you've said. The savings will be reduced per year, but not enough to make a difference to my use case for owning one. Doug Palmer's EV has covered a staggering 293,000 miles, and he says paper mile will cost him an extra £600 a year. Doug Palmer, long distance EV driver whose current EV has covered 293,000 miles. Would you have bought an EV if you knew this was coming? Yes. First straightforward answer. Okay. This guy's a real driver, obviously. But, you know, not hesitant, not, you know, I'd have to think about it. Yes, he'd buy it. I like that. He knows his own mind. How much extra will it cost you? Paper mile will cost me in excess of £600 per annum. Do you think it's fair? No, I don't think it's fair. It is penalising EV owners when we need to be encouraging more people to switch. There is no equivalent penalty for high mileage ICE vehicle owners. Have you heard of fuel tax? The more miles you do, the more fuel tax you pay. If it's going to cost you £600 a year, you must do 20,000 miles a year. You're no spring chicken, so I imagine you've been doing that for as many years as I have. And you obviously at some stage had a petrol or diesel vehicle. There's no equivalent penalty for high mileage ICE vehicle owners. If they are going to introduce this, they need to cap it at say £300 per annum for cars and light commercial vehicles until we reach 50+% of vehicles being BEV, then review. Why would he say that, 50%? Another one saying that. Why? It's almost like all these people have been briefed, isn't it? Again, it takes me back to cop shows. When two people say exactly the same thing, the story is exactly the same. Kind of like they've been coached. What do you think? Could that happen? Let's just read on with. It won't change my EV ownership as I travel whenever or wherever I want to. I will still save over ICE car ownership due to very low maintenance and free charging. Fuck off, Doug. He pays nothing for charging and he's miffed that he's got to pay 3p a mile. I cannot believe some people. Honestly, I can't believe it. Some people just make me tired. I will have to put money aside, especially if they charge for the mileage I cover in Europe as well as my UK mileage. Doug asks, if pay per mile will replace the recent VED changes. My car is now £20 per annum. I feel some EV car and van owners have been unfairly penalised, while there are second-hand diesel cars that still pay £0 to £30. How can that be right? Well, Doug, I agree, especially for the first 2 years, or 23,500 miles, because that's when an EV is actually dirtier than an ICE car. So the first 2 years, you should be paying way more than an ICE car. Now let's have a look at the people. LinkedIn. Jill Nell, Strategic EV Communications, EVA England, speaker and host. Jill started their role at Global Women in EV Day less than 1 month ago. Driving change, one EV story at a time. Yes, it is a story. An outcome-focused leader and business founder, Jill is an electric vehicle EV market and communications specialist with an extensive EV and energy industry and community network spanning decades. In April 2021, Jill was celebrated as one of the top women in EV for campaigns and policy. In June 2022, Jill was selected as one of Insider EV industry power players. Media trained. Jill enjoys regular appearances on radio, BBC Radio 4's Today programme, You and Yours, LBC Radio, Radio 5 Live, with a little television thrown in for good measure, Countryfile, all in the spirit of advocating for EV uptake. Jill has written for a variety of media channels with guest blogs featured on Fully Charged Show, Green Car Guide and Company Car Today, amongst others. She's been quoted in The Times, The Sunday Times, Telegraph, Good Housekeeping, Autocar and across EV and trade publications. Q3 2020 saw Jill cited as Twitter's #3 top global EV influencer. In February 2019, Jill founded EV Clicks, a free online EV image library for use by schools, communities, projects and businesses in aid of the transition to zero-emission transport. Jill is a co-founding director of Electric Vehicle Association, EVA England, and an expert voice for Women Drive Electric UK. Hearing from EV drivers is the best way to understand what it is like to drive an electric, and to understand the impacts of any changes like those announced in Budget 2025 on us. That's why I was so delighted to see 4 of our EVA England members speaking about their experiences in the press this week. Jill Nowell, Marvin Samuels and Gary Colmerford in the This Is Money article. So out of 5 people, 3 of them, that's why I was so delighted to see 4 of our EVA England members speaking about their experiences in the press this week. Jill Nowell, Marvin Samuels and Gary Colmerford in the This Is Money article, already mentioned from our EVA England account, and Kate Tyrrell in The Guardian. So out of 5 people, they've got 3 of them are from EVA England. 1 of them has got a 293,000 mile Tesla. Do you think he's happy with his Tesla if he's done that many miles? I'd say he is. And he's also got free charging. Talk about stacking the deck. They disgust me. The newspaper articles disgust me. I tell you what, I'd like to know what is behind all this. I'd like to know what's behind the people who go on my YouTube account, just make any old shit up. Obviously they've not watched the videos. There's something wrong, isn't there? I mean, to be fair, when you look at the article, let's have a look at Gary. Gary there. Oh, look. The transition to EVs is all about education. Help me spread the knowledge and fight the misinformation. Subscribe to the EV Musings podcast, newsletter or Patreon account. Look at that. Show sponsor, ZapMap. I've been interviewed for The Guardian, The Daily Mail, This Is Money, and The Telegraph this week. In all cases, I was putting forward the case that EVs are the better solution for a large proportion of the UK population at the moment. It was a stacked deck. If you want me to write an article, I would do my jury selection. No, actually I wouldn't. And do you know why I wouldn't do my jury selection? To speak to people who've just got rid of their EVs, because that's not fair. What they should have done, 3 of each. Why did you get rid of your EV? Stacked deck. Disgusting newspaper tactics. It just shows you how desperate these EV people are and how they manipulated their answers to turn a negative into a positive. And they all know it's not true. They all know that overall running costs on an EV, when you take into account depreciation, that's not what the figures show you. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.